Welcome to the Sunday morning class, which I've been doing a series of discussions that relate to Thomas Cole's four-painting series called The Voyage of Life. And there we've been looking in previous sessions about the cycles of life, of birth and growth and decay and death, and how that really illustrates not only a person's life. We also see that in the seasons of a year. We see it in a nation. We see it in a civilization. We also see it really every day. We have our birth, our growth, our decay, and then our death, as it were. These are cycles of life. And in this understanding, then, this is a motif. We're all immersed in this voyage. There's no way of escaping it. And this fundamental theme of our mortality and the question of whether there's futility or meaning in this world depends entirely on our worldview, on our perspective of life itself, whether we're materialists or whether we have a transcendent component in our life. All these things really matter. And I want to give you now, as we move into the paintings themselves, up until now we've been looking at Cole's earlier works. We've been exploring in the past sessions how these cycles of birth, growth, decay, and death are illustrated not only in the work of Thomas Cole, but we see it really in art and in music, in literature, and in film. And now I want us to zoom down into these four paintings themselves. And I want to give you an overview of this so-called Voyage of Life series that we want to see in terms of the process of looking at each of these components of these four paintings and see what they look like and what they mean. And Thomas Cole believed that landscape paintings really should and could impart some kind of moral and spiritual values. And we saw before that Cole's own life journey seems to correspond to this, as he, toward the end of his life, it seems, became more and more convinced of these realities in his last series of paintings that were never completed. But this whole idea of moving as a pilgrim of this world, or a pilgrim really of the next world, and the consequences of pursuing materialism and earthbound achievements on the one hand, in contrast to the quest for the true things that will matter and last for eternity. And in those images then, one was that ended up in degradation, the other with the cross. And so we see that Cole himself had a very profoundly spiritual component in his life and work. And we can see that his great ambition in this series was to convey these truths through these sublime landscapes. And the four-part allegorical series, The Voyage of Life, as we saw, was not his first ideological work. He traveled to Europe, as we saw. He studied British history and paintings and works by old masters. He went to Italy as well. And we saw that he returned to New York and then painted the large work, Angels Appearing to the Shepherds. And then this five-canvas series called the Course of Empire. And just a quick look at those again. And we saw from 1833 to 1836, then after his time in Europe, that he painted these five paintings as a kind of an overview of the human condition and the whole area of the cycles of moving from the savage state in the Course of Empire, where we saw in this collection, then moving from there, and always starting with this mountain at the center, with this rock that's perilously perched on the top to show exactly the idea of the brevity and the uncertainty of the human condition. But in contrast, looking at the natural world, this becomes the center, as we saw. There it is again in the distance. And we're looking at the Arcadian or pastoral state. And as he explores these themes, he then moves into the state of destruction, and where all these achievements then, nature seems to be supplanted. There's the same mountain, but very obscured in comparison to the works of humanity, and then the destruction that takes place. Then there's a desolation. Again, the mountain is there. We see a desolate portrait. And then finally, a consummation that takes place here, where very little of nature is even manifest. We see, again, the mountain is in the distance, but again, we were discussing the process of a whole empire moving through its cycles of moving into the understanding of, go back to that, the whole movement from the inception in a natural state and then the effects of humanity on nature itself and the civilization. And this was a way of portraying really an understanding of the grand panoramic scenes of nature and architecture that would actually have various details and incidents that would focus the story by telling us about the course of nations themselves, that they would come and they would go, just like human lives. But then he wanted in this process, though, in the Voyage of Life, to do something more along the lines of a focus on life itself, of an individual. So he zooms down into looking at one man as opposed to a complicated rise and fall of a nation and an empire. And he also then added explanatory text to accompany the paintings themselves. And he has a river of life that is used. And in childhood, there's a golden boat which emerges from a darkened cave. And then this mysterious earthly source. And this joyous infant reaches out to the world in wonder and naivete. And so as we see this overview here, we then have an aerial castle in the second part, and we'll get more detail on that in a moment. But here is the image of youth, adolescent ambition for fame and glory. And then the third, which he called manhood, the voyager loses control of his life. And there's, in all three instances, in all four really paintings, there's an angel. He doesn't see it in the first three, but he'll see it at the end when he gets to the ocean of eternity in the fourth painting. And so what we see here is a movement into a vision of eternal life. So he evokes really aspects of the spiritual doctrine, a Christian foundation that involves death and resurrection. And so this intrepid voyager can be interpreted in that way as an individual, but it can also be seen in a way as a personification of America at that time in the 19th century in its own adolescent state of development, and then a kind of a warning as well. Now it turns out that there were two sets of these paintings, and the first set of the Voyage of Life, again, very similar. These were painted 1839 to 1840. And so in these four paintings then, this first set, then we see the angel emerging from this cave. And we see the river of life, and we'll go into more detail with the second set. And then the second in the series is youth. And again, the angel is not seen by the youth. He's looking instead toward this vision of some kind of a ethereal or a kind of a palace, as it were, for accomplishment and fame. But what he doesn't see in the distance is that the stream is going to not go straight in this direction at all, but rather it's going to go in this direction where it's going to move around and then over here. So it's going to turn in a way he did not anticipate. So as we see that then, the third painting in the series, manhood. And so, again, this is the first the series, and they're very, very similar. And here then, he reaches and moves toward the end of that journey, and he sees in the distance then the eternal sea, as it were. And then finally, old age, and for the first time, he sees the angel, and he sees a destiny before him. So let me explain and unpack the implications of these paintings by looking at the second set of the Voyage of Life and kind of describe what takes place there. So as we look at this, these paintings, then the original series is now at the Munson Williams Proctor Institute in Utica, New York, and their two versions were very similar, but he had a patron, Luman Reed, and he died in 1836, and at that time, Cole had a description of an allegory of human life, as he said. He called it a series, sufficiently detailed to suggest his thinking, which was already pretty far along when he said, first I see the source of a river issuing from a cave and a child in a boat with a guardian angel steering. And then he said, second, and I'm going to describe his own outline of these in a moment. But second, he said, I see youth. The river, the child becomes a youth and is seen in the boat. The river is increased, and the scene has become more extensive and more grand. And the guardian is just stepping out of the boat and pointing forward. So he's now pointing forward to the way, and he's saying effectively, move on. He's leaving to his own reason for a guide. In the next scene, which we call manhood, the river, as he says, trembles over the rocks, a stormy scene, boat dashes among troubled waters, the man struggling to save himself in this bark. A guardian is still seen at a distance, but now watching at a distance. And then in his own description, before he actually painted these, he said, a view of a dark ocean, the boat with an old man entering on it. Chaos and darkness spread before. But through an opening in the clouds, a glorious city is seen, and seen approaching the old man, the guardian who points to the city. Words of verses might be inscribed on rocks or elsewhere explanatory on the mouth of the cave. And so he was talking about, how can I convey this, communicate this to an audience? And so in 1839, he found a patron who was going to commission the Voyage of Life, and his name was Samuel Ward. He was a New York banker and collector. And he signed a contract for these 4 paintings as they were described. And this is where the first set would be made. And so in that time then, the Voyage of Life's choice of a stream to symbolize life was really necessitated, depicting both changes of time, which was accomplished clearly by showing the traveler aging, but also landscape to indicate that each stage of life occurs at a different point along the stream. And so we see different components here, but his benefactor then, Samuel Ward, died in 1839, and he was distressed by the loss of his patron. And he then had to deal with the Ward family through an attorney named James Huggins, who became increasingly adversarial. The net effect of this was that the Voyage of Life might, once leaving his possession, then be closed off from the public, and he couldn't really they wouldn't be seen. It would be in a private collection. It was in 1841 that he sailed for Europe, convinced that all the creative energy he'd expended on the Voyage of Life was meaningless if the series couldn't be seen. So he wanted to salvage the situation, and so he wrote to his wife on the day of his departure that he wanted to paint a replica set while residing abroad. And he went ultimately to Rome, and then began work on this second series that had only minor alterations compared with the first one. And so he described, we see this situation here where he comes back to America in July of 1842. And he did not want the original series to be shown publicly. He said, instead, I have another set which I intend to exhibit, and it would injure me to have the original set exhibited now. And so he then suddenly died in February of 1848. And this meant that the first voyage of the version of the Voyage of Life was included in the March 1848 Memorial Exhibition, which was held at the American Art Union. And in June, the art union voted to purchase the 4 paintings that he had done in Europe, in Rome, and to distribute that set by lottery. And so the organization further decided that to take advantage of the interest attached by the public to the memory of Mr. Cole, there would be an engraving that would be based upon the painting of youth. And so this engraving was made of this painting, and it actually brought it to the public's attention. Quite a number of copies were distributed, and then Smelly also then did more engravings of the other paintings. And Cole himself believed that these were his most important paintings, The Course of Empire and The Voyage of Life, as his most important creations. It was in the 20th century that a number of sources really helped us understand the beginning of the biblical image of the river of life, and moving through this process through these paintings, that there were other sources, like not just Bunyan's Pilgrim's Progress, but also other ideas as well. Samuel Taylor Coleridge's Kubla Khan, as well as William Wordsworth's Ode, Intimations of Mortality and Recollections from Early Childhood, the first canto of Childe Harold's Pilgrimage by Lord Byron, and Shelley's Spirit of Solitude, Thanatopsis, William Cullen Bryant, and other writers of this sort. So there was a whole series of a spate of these writings that were really exploring this motif, this theme of the journey of life itself and what that meant, and the brevity of the earthbound sojourn. And so what we see in these paintings then is to do something that had been not done really before, a monumental task of creating coherent visual images of a subject in this manner, which had not been so fully delineated, to actually have an allegorical portrait of these 4 components of life itself. And so he didn't want to take any chances, so he wanted to make sure his meanings would be clear. As a consequence, then, he actually described them as in his own material, where the traveler ages, the stream and the landscape change character, the hourglass empties, and life passes on. So in childhood, then, let's just look at these paintings in more detail and explore the implications of these paintings. So this renowned 4-part series then traces the journey of an archetypical hero along the, quote, river of life. And he's confidently assuming control of his destiny, and he's oblivious to the dangers that await him as we move into the area of his youth. He's not able to see that. So what happens then, as he gets older, there's a matter of self-doubt that begins to take place, and it threatens his own existence with nature itself, and it's only prayer that can rescue him ultimately from the abyss of death itself. And so this whole concept of wanting to see from the innocence of childhood to the flush of youthful overconfidence, the trials and tribulations of middle age, and then the hero's triumphant salvation, there's a connection here with the Christian doctrine of death and resurrection. And some have also made a comparison with this doctrine of death in terms of the cycle of life with America, and that the intrepid voyager may be read as a personification of America itself at this time at its adolescence. And so if this is the case, then we have in his adolescence, his youth, that we would see that there's a dire warning then to those who are caught up in the feverish quest for manifest destiny, the unbridled westward expansion and industrialization that would have, as he would see it, tragic consequences for both man and nature. There's a poem that's associated with the childhood that I want to read to you here. So going back to the childhood image here. Who shall preserve thee, beautiful child? Keep thee as thou art now. Bring thee a spirit undefiled at God's pure throne to bow. This world is but a bruised reed, and life grows early dim. Who shall bear thee in thy need to lead thee up to him? He who himself was undefiled, with him we trust thee, beautiful child. Cole wrote explanatory notes for each picture, and when I was at the National Gallery of Art, I took these photos of these plates that they had here that describe that are his own descriptions that he wrote in 1840 of the four paintings, and he describes them in this manner. And so I'm going to kind of use these descriptions, but I'm going to take you back. So I'll read them to you as we kind of work our way through these paintings themselves. And here are Cole's eloquent words describing the journey. He says, "A stream is seen issuing from a deep cavern in the side of a craggy and precipitous mountain, whose summit is hidden in clouds." And so you can't really see the fullness of the summit of this mountain. "And from out of the cave glides a boat, whose golden prow and sides are sculptured into figures of the hours." And so we can see here the boat itself, figures of the hours that are described here. And so these little figures here along the side of the boat here. And you'll notice as well there's an hourglass at the front of the boat. And this, of course, symbolizes the passage of time itself. The child is oblivious, of course, to the angel that's guiding him at the tiller. And so he goes on to say, steered by an angelic form and laden with buds and flowers. So you can see the images here. So there's a beauty involved in here, laden with buds and flowers abound on the riverbank as well. So there's a natural beauty that is there. He goes on to say, it bears a laughing infant, the voyager whose varied course the artist has attempted to delineate. On either side of the banks, the stream are clothed in luxuriant herbage and flowers. So you can see various kinds of flowers that are there, including the lotus. And you can see there's a beauty, a fecundity in the natural world here that surrounds him. It's a world that seems to be welcoming him into its presence here as he goes in the stream. So he emerges out of this tunnel, as it were, out of this chaos, and then he's born into this world itself. He says, Cole wrote, the dark cavern is emblematic of our earthly origin, and he says, the mysterious past. The boat, composed of figures of the hours, which are images, the thought that we are born in the hours down the stream of life. So he sees the stream of life, as it were, again an allegory, but he wants to make it clear exactly what he had in mind when he was making these paintings, when he did them in Rome. That we're born in the hours down the stream of life, and the boat identifies the subject in each picture, the rosy light of the morning. And so we, again, as the four paintings progress, we move from morning to dusk. And so here is the rosy light of the morning. The luxuriant flowers and plants are emblems of the joyousness of early life. And the close banks and the limited scope of the scene indicate the narrow experience of childhood. So the banks indeed are close. The vision is narrow. He says the nature of its pleasures and desires, the Egyptian lotus in the foreground of the picture is symbolical of human life itself. And so you see as well the whole picture of the lotus and the blossoms that are to be seen here are symbolic, really, of life itself. Joyousness and wonder are the characteristic emotions of childhood. The second painting transitions into youth. Again, a young man is seen rowing down a boat, and it's a tree-lined river, as you can see. And this young man does not see the angel who's bidding him adieu. And this is the second in this series of paintings, which depict the various stages of this allegorical journey through life. And so what we see here is a process in youth that's described by Cole. Again, the description I have here. The stream now pursues its course through a landscape of wider scope and more diversified beauty. And you can see it's luxuriant in the beauty with the tree, the palm in the foreground here. And the angel, again, the youth unheeding to the angel, he is now the one who's moving the boat. He's at the rudder. And the hourglass, again, is in the hand of this little angelic figure at the front of the boat. And he is moving and looking off in this direction. And what direction is he seeing? He sees these cloud-capped towers and gorgeous palaces, to use Shakespearean imagery. And he sees this as a kind of an image of a sense of hope. As Cole describes it in his words, the stream now pursues its course through a landscape of wider scope and more diversified beauty. Trees of rich growth overshadow its banks, and verdant hills form the base of lofty mountains. The infant of the former scene is become a youth on the verge of manhood. He is now alone in the boat. The angel is no longer with him in the boat. He takes the helm himself. And there's an attitude of confidence and eager expectation as he gazes then on a cloudy pile of architecture, as Cole describes it, an air-built castle that rises dome above dome in the far-off blue sky. The guardian spirit stands upon the bank of the stream, and with serious yet benignant countenance seems to be bidding the impetuous voyager Godspeed. Now this beautiful stream, again, as he sees his image reflected in the water, gets wider. And as he moves forward then, he does not know that the stream is going to arc, it's going to turn, it's going to go around this way. He sees himself going in this direction, but actually it's going to move in this direction, and ultimately it'll go past and continue in the background in this way. So you will see him going down to here, and that'll be the scene of the next of the paintings as we move forward. The beautiful stream flows directly toward the aerial palace for a distance, but at length it makes a sudden turn. And there's the turn that we're going to be seeing moving off in this direction, which the youth does not anticipate. Seen in the glimpses beneath the trees until it at last descends with rapid current into a rocky ravine, where the voyager will be found in the next picture. Over the remote hills, which seems to intercept the stream and turn it from its hitherto direct course, a path is dimly seen, tending directly toward that cloudy fabric, which is the object and desire of the voyager. So there's a path, this dim path that you can see here, that's off in this direction, and he's hoping that's the way he would be able to go, but it will not be so. The scenery of this picture, its clear stream, its lofty trees, its towering mountains, its unbounded distance and transparent atmosphere, figure forth the romantic beauty of youthful imaginings, when the mind magnifies the mean and common into the magnificent before experience teaches what is real. So again, Cole is describing this experience and saying this is a symbol, a portrait of his youthful enthusiasm, but not informed by the nature of true experience, to use William Blake's image. The mind magnifies the mean and common into the magnificent before experience teaches what is the real. The gorgeous cloud-built palace, whose most glorious domes seem yet half revealed to the eye, growing more and more lofty as we gaze, is emblematic of the daydreams of youth, its aspirations after glory and fame. And the dimly seen path would intimate that youth in his impetuous career is forgetful that he's embarked on the stream of life. In some way he supposes that somehow he could actually dock there, as it were, and get off and go off the stream of life, basically leave that stream and move on to this and enjoy this experience. But the stream will continue to carry him on because the stream of life is inexorable. He goes on to say that its current sweeps along with resistless force and increases in swiftness as it descends toward the great ocean of eternity. We all understand what that's like. It increases in swiftness. The older we get, the faster the years do seem to move by. So this is the second of the paintings. And then we move into the third painting. And again, we see manhood. And again, we see Cole's notes on the voyage of manhood, when he describes storm and cloud enshroud a rugged and dreary landscape. Bare, impending precipices rise in the lurid light. And so as he describes it in this manner, then, we see the swollen stream rushes furiously down a dark ravine. So we can see the terror that's before him here. He's out of control. It's gotten more and more swift, more and more overwhelming, greater in size. And as well, the figures in his boat is no longer, he can't even control it anymore. It seems that the helm is no longer working. He's out of control. He can no longer guide it as he did going back to youth for a moment. He was at the helm, but he could control it. But now, all control seems to be abandoned. Also, it seems to be lost. And so he's now in a modality of prayer. So as Cole writes, the swollen stream rushes furiously down a dark ravine, whirling and foaming in its wild career and speeding toward the ocean, which is dimly seen through the mist and falling rain. So you see the mist and the falling rain, and the ocean is now seen in that distance. This is the ultimate direction and destination that's before him. And so he's moving into a position of almost despair. Cole goes on to say, the boat is there, plunging amid the turbulent waters. The voyager is now a man of middle age. The helm of the boat is gone, and he looks imploringly toward heaven, as if heaven's aid alone could save him from the perils that surround him. The guardian spirit calmly sits in the clouds, watching with an air of solicitude the affrighted voyager. Demon forms are hovering in the air. There are various demon forms as well that seem to be hovering in the air as well above him. And these forms that seem to be above him, then he'll describe. He says, trouble is characteristic of the period of manhood. In childhood, there is no cankering care. In youth, no despairing thought. It is only when experience has taught us the realities of this world that we lift from our eyes the golden veil of earthly life, that we feel deep and abiding sorrow. And in the picture, the gloomy, eclipse-like tone, the conflicting elements, the trees riven by tempest. Very little of beauty in nature now. It's been lost. It's all now, it seems that that former beauty has been destroyed and corrupted. And the ocean, dimly seen, figures the end of life to which the voyager is now approaching. The demon forms, as Cole describes them, are suicide, intemperance, and murder, which are the temptations that beset men in their direst trouble. The upward and imploring look of the voyager shows his dependence on a superior power, and that faith saves him from the destruction that seems inevitable. So we have this turning, as it were, in this context, from his own resources to divine resources, and this is what Cole is really effectively communicating and teaching. It's the difference between what William Blake called songs of innocence and experience. And so in the time of our innocence, we see the world in a one way, and all its hopes and its dreams and its possibilities. And it's not informed yet by experience. I sometimes draw a distinction between soft hope and hard reality, that we live in a tensioned interplay between those two. By this I mean that hope is soft, it's supple, and there's a movement there that we would like it to be true, but the harshness of reality sets in, and our hopes are never fulfilled in the way we might have wanted to think. But we could go to one extreme or the other. The hardness and harshness of reality could cause us to be jaded, to become almost cynical, and have no hope at all. On the other hand, our hope could be not well grounded, and so it could be sentimental and syrupy, but not really valid. So we live in such a way, especially as a follower of the way, that we live such that we do want to maintain hope, but in the right object. And the harsh realities of life are designed to train us and teach us that this is not really our home. So it's a very different vision than the earthbound vision. If we only had a materialistic point of view, a materialistic perspective, this is all we'd have, and we would truly despair. But there's much more than that, and that's what Cole is trying to teach us. And so as we go into the fourth of these paintings, we see is old age. And again, my photo of the notes that were there in the museum. It was interesting when we were there. We went into this, I was with two friends at the National Gallery of Art, and we went in the process of, as you typically would do, from Egypt and Rome and ancient cultures, and then gradually move your way into the medieval world and Renaissance and more contemporary paintings, the Impressionists and so forth, and then the 20th century. And as we went through this, we were there for several hours, and we were getting tired, but we had just a little bit more time before the museum closed, so we decided there was one more room we wanted to go to, and we didn't know what it would contain, so we went into that extra room, and there it was, a room that contained these four original paintings by Cole. Massive paintings indeed, the size of them, and about 8 feet by 6 feet, and they were a cat-a-corner to one another, so we could just look at them. And that's when I decided to take these photographs of Cole's own description of these paintings. So it was the best part of our day. It really tied it all together, and it was very powerful. And that's what gave me really the idea to do this series on this painting, because of the obvious biblical implications that go with this. Before we continue on with the old age painting, I'd like to go back to manhood and just read a little poem that's associated with it. Through darkening rains and threatening storms, the shattered bark doth ride. O save the voyager from the wreck of sin's devouring tide. When by the dreadful tempest borne, high on the broken wave, we know thou art not slow to hear, nor impotent to save. So again, this is an allusion to this prayer, as it were, where he begins to realize he's out of his own resources. He's come to the end of his tether. And that's when he's able to look up, ultimately, in the fourth picture, to old age. So in Cole's description, then, before we get to that, there's another poem that's been associated with this. And so, while through this changing world we roam from infancy to age, heaven is the Christian pilgrim's home, his rest at every stage. A beam from heaven is sent to cheer the Christian on his road, and angels are attending near to bear him home to God. The world recedes, it disappears. Heaven opens on my eyes. My ears with sounds seraphic ring. Lend your wings, I mount, I fly. O grave, where is thy victory? O death, where is thy sting? So let's take a look at Cole's description then, as he says, portentous clouds are brooding over a vast and midnight ocean. So we see these clouds, and it is vast indeed, and the motion is off in the distance. A few barren rocks are seen through the gloom, the last shores of the world. So these are the last shores that we can see in this world. These form the mouth of the river, and the boat shattered by storms, its figures of the hours broken and droopings, is seen gliding over deep waters. The hourglass is now gone, as you can see. The boat and the hours themselves have virtually disappeared. All he has left now is God's sovereign protection and guidance. Going back to Cole's description, directed by the guardian spirit who thus far has accompanied him unseen, the voyager, now an old man, looks upward to an opening in the clouds from whence a glorious light bursts forth, and angels are seen descending the cloudy steps, as if to welcome him to the haven of immortal life. So we see not only this angel that has been with him, but other angels that are off in the distance, and multitudes, as you can see, that are portrayed along the way, so that we could see angels all throughout this painting here, and the clouds and sky, to welcome him ultimately to the top. In Cole's words, the stream has now reached the ocean to which all life is tending. The world to old age is destitute of interest. There is no longer any green thing upon it. You can see desolation. There's nothing of beauty, of fecundity at all. It's all desolate and barren. The broken and drooping figures of the boat show that time is nearly ended. The chains of corporeal existence are falling away, and already the mind has glimpses of immortal life. The angelic being whose presence until now the voyager has been unconscious is revealed to him. So it's intriguing that this angel who was with him in the previous paintings, as we can see from the earlier ones, from the very beginning, he was behind him. Of course, the child did not see him. And then in the next one, he's bidding him adieu, but again, he doesn't behold him. He's looking forward to what his aspirations are. And then in the next painting, the angel is seen at a distance. Again, he's not seeing the angel, but he's pleading in his despair. And finally, then in this painting now, he finally sees and beholds the angel as an old man. Cole goes on to write, the chains of corporeal existence are falling away, and already the mind has glimpses of immortal life. The angelic being of whose presence until now the voyager has been unconscious is revealed to him, and with a countenance beaming with joy, shows to his wondering gaze scenes such as the eye of mortal man has never yet seen. So he's pointing along to something that you have not seen. Eye has not seen, nor ear has heard, nor entered into the heart of man all that God has prepared for those who know him. So this is really Cole's journey into this understanding of what life was really meant to be about all along. We can see then that in this portraiture, we can see Cole discussing and describing these things that are very similar to his very last paintings, that last series that he did, The Pilgrim of the World. And then on this, and before that, The Cross at Sunset, which was painted in the last year of Cole's life, where, as we saw before, he focuses on the cross. And here in the Pilgrim of the World on his journey, this was a study, he never completed it. But we see the Pilgrim of the World versus the Pilgrim of the Cross. The world welcomes him with open arms, and there is a similar vision, an ethereal, airy, cloud-like vision that's drawing him to what he hopes is going to be his destiny. But at the end of his journey, as Cole clearly showed in this study for the series The Cross and the World in 1847, we see here is now death and decay. There's nothing for him because he went on the wrong path. Indeed, at the beginning of that series, it started with the father who is sending the two sons off to find their fortune, and one moves in this direction, and he's the Pilgrim of the World. And in this study, then you're going to see this. This is what his suggestion of what the world will be bidding, whereas the Pilgrim of the Cross is heading in another direction, and ultimately will meet up with that cross. And then we saw as well that this is the end of his journey. The contrast then between one and the other couldn't be greater, because this is the desolation of the world, but the glory of the cross at the end again. And you can see angelic figures, and there's the heavenly host as it moves, as it welcomes him, as the angels come down to welcome him into this new realm. 3 of them at the foreground, and then many, many multitudes in the distance as we go, and ultimately all pointing upwards to the cross of Christ.